and welcome to Your Favourite Teacher. Today we're looking at English Language GCSE and how to achieve top marks using your reading and writing skills. Let's look at narrative writing. Boil it down to its key components. And a story is just really three things: a beginning, a middle, and an end. Maybe this is why the prospect of writing a story doesn't seem all that complicated when you get the writing section of Language Paper 1. Add to that the fact that stories are everywhere around us, in books, TV shows, documentaries, movies, even in the way we converse. And storytelling just seems like nothing to worry about, right? Well, in terms of Language Paper 1's writing section, your story should actually be thought of as more of a narrative. What does that mean? In this video, we'll detail what a narrative entails, how to structure your narrative, and what to avoid to make sure you plan as sound and sure for success as possible. First things first, what's a story? Like we said initially, a story can be just three things: beginning, middle, and end. Your planning for the narrative option on Language Paper 1 doesn't need to be any more complicated than that if you plan well. What makes a good beginning, middle, and end though? What should we plan to put in these parts of our story? Well, another way of thinking about this three-step process might be to call them introduction, problem, and solution. Another name for this process is sometimes called situation, complication, and resolution. Any of these three titles will work perfectly if you choose which wording you want to commit to memory. In reality, all three mean the same thing. The beginning, the introduction, the situation. First, you'll need to plan where your story starts. Plan to introduce your characters and setting and establish the situation they are in to begin with. A story doesn't have to start with a calm, quiet, and peaceful place. This initial situation could be an extremely dangerous one that has been ongoing for a long time. Whatever it is though, your beginning is the starting point for your story. Here we'll get to know where we are, who the characters are, and what's going on in their lives of any importance to the rest of the story. The middle, the problem, the complication. Now that everything's set up, something tends to go wrong. Conflict of some sort has to occur in order for things to happen. So it's probably best if something goes wrong for your characters. Maybe then they'll try to fix it. Maybe they'll have to escape and run away from the problem. Whatever it is, your problem should aim to change the first situation of your story in some important way. This is where a lot of your imagination will need to come into play, because the something that happens has to be of interest to your reader. A good idea is to list 4 or 5 different ideas of what could go wrong and what your character could try to do to fix the matter. Write down the first handful of ideas in your head in a list. Even if you don't like your ideas at first, once a few ideas are there for you to use, what you find is that they might connect to one another and work in ways you hadn't thought of before. Having options also prevents you from getting stuck, a fear which could be a big problem for any story writer, let alone those of you stuck writing that story in an exam hall. The ending, the solution, the resolution. Don't think that you have to end your story with everything returned to happiness and well-explained blissfulness. That's not real life. What is important is that you've shown your character try to handle the conflict which has occurred at this point in some way. Their action has already made up much of the story, but the action doesn't have to stop there. A few ideas on how to end a problem could include a neat and tidy resolution. Problem solved, we can return to life as it was. The cliffhanger. Leave it uncertain for your readers whether or not the problem will be resolved. The cyclical narrative. Return to exactly where you were at the start of the story. Reintroduce the problem right when the reader thinks it has been solved. The untied ending. Have your main character's attempts to solve the problem end in disaster, making even more problems than before. Whatever you do though, don't end with your character waking up from a dream. Not only are examiners bored of this by the time they'll reach your script, they'll likely hate you for effectively having wasted their time with a story which literally went nowhere. When you plan these 3 steps, don't feel like you have to do everything from beginning to end. You might want to work backwards in your plan. Where do you want to end up? For example, if your story is meant to end with the 2 characters who hated each other making friends, What would have drawn them together to finally like each other? Then what was the problem that they faced in the beginning? Already you've worked back through the 3 steps you'll need to plan a full story, beginning, middle and end. And another tip, when you're planning, don't feel like your story has to be the most extravagant, imaginative plot of all time. Most of the stories we read are based on real life people, or based around fictional characters living in real places with real problems that people face. A simple, well thought through beginning, middle and end doesn't have to begin in outer space and end in another dimension. Likely your own surroundings are the best place to draw inspiration from to set your story, exactly for the reason that you already know enough about them to be able to describe in good detail what goes on there. Another component of this planning that we haven't yet discussed is characters. In a short story, the kind you're going to be writing for Language Paper 1's writing section, no one expects a cast of endless characters. In fact, having more than a few characters will probably just confuse what should be a short, clear and effective story. Most likely, you will only actually have 1 or 2 main characters. First of all, you're best using first-person narration. This is then your first character. Your main character, or protagonist, is who everything in the text happens to. It's whose voice and ideas about everything that happens we as readers are given. This character is going to be consistent throughout the entire story. They're going to make up most of what happens, especially in the beginning and the ending. Your second character most likely will be related to the problem you provide. If you're not going for a natural disaster sort of situation, you might want to use a second character in the middle in order to create a problem that your main character has to react to. Perhaps someone steals something out of plain sight. Perhaps a stranger walking down the street approaches your protagonist. Perhaps your best friend comes to your character with their personal problem for you to solve. Perhaps a teacher creates an issue for your main character. This second character is likely going to be used to create an issue which your character is forced to respond to. Having this second character also then gives the opportunity for dialogue to appear and conflict to be acted out physically if necessary. Other than that, third characters can be used in order to help your main character. A friend, a parent, a teacher maybe. But don't have them just swoop in at the end and save the day. That rather spoils the enjoyment of the story. For that reason alone, it's best to stick to just 1 or 2 characters. Now that you have all the details around how to plan, you're ready to begin writing. A narrative will have 4 key components. 1, action, in which your narrator describes what happens. 2, thought, in which your narrator's own ideas are explored. 3, description, in which your narrator describes a setting or event which has occurred. 4, dialogue, in which the character speaks either to themselves or to others. Even if there is only 1 character, it's a good idea to have some dialogue in there at some point, just to show the examiners you know how to use dialogue in the story. Have your character shout out for something or call out for help if necessary. When writing, it's a good idea to swap from each one of these to the next with every paragraph. For example, begin with describing sitting outside the cafe on a warm summer's day and the world your character occupies. Your next paragraph could then move into the thoughts of your main character, which are sparked by that summer's day. A short dialogue could follow, the characters talking to a waiter perhaps. Now introduce a problem with action. Describe a table tipping over, the sound of cups and saucers going everywhere. From there, you can move through those 4 key components as you write as you wish. Just remember to follow the 3-step plan you set up in the beginning. Establishing a clear structure of beginning, middle and end, choosing 1 or 2 characters, then writing using all 4 narrative components are a great way to begin creating excellent narratives. For more tips, watch our video on establishing setting or using language effectively. But remember, don't overdo it. The examiner wants to see an interesting story which can clearly show you understand what a story is. No need to reinvent the wheel. I'm Miss Meeks, and we've been revising the English Language GCSE. Good luck.